Slavoj ZIZEK, /SLVX/ listen, SLAH ZHEEJEK, Slovene, Slavoj, born March 21, 1949, is a Slovenian philosopher, cultural theorist, and public intellectual. 4-5 He is International Director of the Birkbeck Institute for the Humanities at the University of London, visiting professor at New York University and a senior researcher at the University of Ljubljana's Department of Philosophy. 6 He primarily works on continental philosophy, particularly Hegelianism, psychoanalysis and Marxism, and political theory, as well as film criticism and theology. ZIZEK is the most famous associate of the Ljubljana School of Psychoanalysis, a group of Slovenian academics working on German idealism, Lacanian psychoanalysis, ideology critique, and media criticism. His breakthrough work was 1989's The Sublime Object of Ideology, his first book in English, which was decisive in the introduction of the Ljubljana School's thought to English-speaking audiences. He has written over 50 books in multiple languages. The idiosyncratic style of his public appearances, frequent magazine op-eds, and academic works, characterized by use of obscene jokes and pop-cultural examples, as well as politically incorrect provocations, have gained him fame, controversy and criticism both in and outside academia. 7. In 2012, Foreign Policy listed ZIZEK on its list of top 100 global thinkers, calling him a celebrity philosopher, 8 while elsewhere he has been dubbed the Elvis of cultural theory, 9 and the most dangerous philosopher in the West. 10 ZIZEK has been called the leading Hegelian of our time, 11 and the foremost exponent of Lacanian theory. 12 A journal, the International Journal of ZIZEK Studies, was founded by Professors David J. Gunkel and Paul A. Taylor to engage with his work. 13. Contents. 1 Life and career. 1.1 Early life. 1.2 Education. 1.3 Career. 1.4 Political engagement. 1.4.1 Support for Donald Trump. 1.5 Public life. 2 Personal life. 2.1 Taste. 3 Thought. 3.1 Failure and subjectivity. 3.2 Political theory. 3.2.1 Ideology. 3.2.2 Freedom. 3.2.3 Communism. 3.3 Theology. 4 Criticism and controversy. 4.1 Inconsistency and ambiguity. 4.2 Stylistic confusion. 4.3 Careless scholarship. 4.3.1 Plagiarism. 4.4 Defense of Eurocentrism. 4.5 Transgender issues. 5 Works. 5.1 Bibliography. 5.2 Filmography. 6 References. 6.1 Citations. 7 External links. Life and career. Early life. ZIZEK was born in Ljubljana, PR Slovenia, Yugoslavia, into a middle-class family. 14 His father Jos ZIZEK was an economist and civil servant from the region of Prekmurje in eastern Slovenia. His mother Vesna, a native of the Gorizia Hills in the Slovenian littoral, was an accountant in a state enterprise. His parents were atheists. 15 He spent most of his childhood in the coastal town of Portorož, where he was exposed to Western film, theory, and popular culture. 316 When ZIZEK was a teenager his family moved back to Ljubljana where he attended Bežigrad High School. 16 Originally wanting to become a filmmaker himself, he abandoned these ambitions and chose to pursue philosophy instead. 17. Education. In 1967, during an era of liberalization in Titoist Yugoslavia, ZIZEK enrolled at the University of Ljubljana and studied philosophy and sociology. 18. ZIZEK had already begun reading French structuralists prior to entering university, and in 1967 he published the first translation of a text by Jacques Derrida into Slovenian. 19 ZIZEK frequented the circles of dissident intellectuals, including the Hegelian philosophers Tine Hribar and Ivo Urbancic. 19 and published articles in alternative magazines, such as Praxis, Tribuna, and Problemi, which he also edited. 16 In 1971 he accepted a job as an assistant researcher with the promise of tenure, but was dismissed after his master's thesis was denounced by the authorities as being non-Marxist. 20 He graduated from the University of Ljubljana in 1981 with a Doctor of Arts in Philosophy for his dissertation entitled The Theoretical and Practical Relevance of French Structuralism. 18 He spent the next few years in what was described as professional wilderness, also fulfilling his legal duty of undertaking a year-long national service in the Yugoslav army in Karlovac. 18. Career. During the 1980s, ZIZEK edited and translated Jacques Lacan, Sigmund Freud, and Louis Althusser. 21 He used Lacan's work to interpret Hegelian and Marxist philosophy. Citation needed. In 1986, ZIZEK completed a second doctorate, Doctor of Philosophy in Psychoanalysis, at the University of Paris 8 under Jacques-Alain Miller, entitled La philosophie entre les symptômes et l'enfantisme. 22. ZIZEK wrote the introduction to Slovene translations of G. K. Chesterton's and John L. E. Care's detective novels. 23 In 1988, He published his first book dedicated entirely to film theory, Pogled s strany. 24. The following year, he achieved international recognition as a social theorist with the 1989 publication of his first book in English, The Sublime Object of Ideology. 25.3. ZIZEK has been publishing in journals such as Lacanian Inc. and in these times in the United States, the New Left Review and the London Review of Books in the United Kingdom, and with the Slovenian left liberal magazine Mladina and newspapers Dnevnik and Delo. He also cooperates with the Polish leftist magazine Krytyka Polityczna, regional Southeast European left-wing journal Nowy Plamen, and serves on the editorial board of the psychoanalytical journal Problemy. 26. ZIZEK is a series editor of the Northwestern University Press series Diaresis that publishes works that deal not only with philosophy, but also will intervene at the levels of ideology critique, politics, and art theory. 27. Political engagement. In the late 1980s, ZIZEK came to public attention as a columnist for the alternative youth magazine Mladina, which was critical of Tito's policies, Yugoslav politics, especially the militarization of society. He was a member of the Communist Party of Slovenia until October 1988, when he quit in protest against the JBTZ trial together with 32 other Slovenian intellectuals. 28. Between 1988 and 1990, he was actively involved in several political and civil society movements which fought for the democratization of Slovenia, most notably the Committee for the Defense of Human Rights. 29. In the first free elections in 1990, he ran as the Liberal Democratic Party's candidate for the former four-person collective presidency of Slovenia. 25. Despite his activity in liberal democratic projects, ZIZEK has continued to identify himself as a communist, and has been critical of right-wing circles, such as nationalists, conservatives, and classical liberals both in Slovenia and worldwide. He wrote that the convention center in which nationalist Slovene writers hold their conventions should be blown up, adding, "Since we live in the time without any sense of irony, I must add I don't mean it literally." 30. Similarly, he jokingly made the following comment in May 2013, during Subversive Festival: "If they don't support Syriza, then, in my vision of the democratic future, all these people will get from me is a first-class one-way ticket to a gulag." In response, the center-right New Democracy Party claimed ZIZEK's comments should be understood literally, not ironically. 31-32. ZIZEK signing books in 2009. In 2013, ZIZEK corresponded with imprisoned Russian activist and Pussy Riot member Nadezhda Tolokonnikova. 33. All hearts were beating for you as long as you were perceived as just another version of the liberal democratic protest against the authoritarian state. The moment it became clear that you rejected global capitalism, reporting on Pussy Riot became much more ambiguous. Just before the 2017 French presidential election, ZIZEK stated that one could not choose between Macron and Le Pen, arguing that the neoliberalism of Macron just gives rise to neo-fascism anyway. This was in response to many on the left calling for support for Macron to prevent a Le Pen victory. 34. In 2022, ZIZEK expressed his support for the Slovenian political party Levica, the left, at its 5th annual conference. 35. In an opinion article for The Guardian, ZIZEK argued in favor of giving full support to Ukraine after the Russian invasion and for creating a stronger NATO in response to Russian aggression. 36. Support for Donald Trump. In a 2016 interview with Channel 4, ZIZEK said that, were he American, he would vote for Donald Trump in the 2016 United States presidential election. "I'm horrified at him, Trump. I'm just thinking that Hillary is the true danger. If Trump wins, both big parties, Republicans and Democrats, would have to return to basics, rethink themselves, and maybe some things can happen there. That's my desperate, very desperate hope, that if Trump wins, listen, America is not a dictatorial state, he will not introduce fascism, but it will be a kind of big awakening. New political processes will be set in motion, will be triggered. But I'm well aware that things are very dangerous here. I'm just aware that Hillary stands for this absolute inertia, the most dangerous one. Because she is a cold warrior, and so on, connected with banks, pretending to be socially progressive." 37. These views were derisively characterized as accelerationist 38 and were labeled regressive by Noam Chomsky, who claimed that it was the same point that people like him said about Hitler in the early 30s. 39. In 2019 and 2020, ZIZEK defended his views 40 saying that Trump's election created, for the first time in I don't know how many decades, a true American left, citing the boost it gave Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. 41. However, regarding the 2020 United States presidential election, ZIZEK reported himself tempted by changing his position, saying Trump is a little too much. 41. In another interview, he stood by his 2016 wager that Trump's election would lead to a socialist reaction. "Maybe I was right, but claimed that now with coronavirus, no Trump. Difficult as it is for me to say this, but now I would say Biden better than Trump, although he is far from ideal. 42. In his 2022 book, Heaven in Disorder, ZIZEK continued to express a preference for Joe Biden over Donald Trump, stating that even though Biden, like Trump, lies and represents big capital, only in a more polite form, Trump was corroding the ethical substance of our lives. 43. Public life. ZIZEK speaking in 2011. In 2003, ZIZEK wrote text to accompany Bruce Weber's photographs in a catalog for Abercrombie & Fitch. Questioned as to the seemliness of a major intellectual writing ad copy, ZIZEK told the Boston Globe, "If I were asked to choose between doing things like this to earn money and becoming fully employed as an American academic, kissing ass to get a tenured post, I would with pleasure choose writing for such journals." 44. ZIZEK and his thought have been the subject of several documentaries. The 1996 Liebe dein Symptom wie dich selbst is a German documentary on him. In the 2004 The Reality of the Virtual, ZIZEK gave a 1-hour lecture on his interpretation of Lacan's tripartite thesis of the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real. Citation needed. ZIZEK is a 2005 documentary by Astra Taylor on his philosophy. The 2006 The Pervert's Guide to Cinema and 2012 The Pervert's Guide to Ideology also portray ZIZEK's ideas and cultural criticism. Examined Life, 2008, features ZIZEK speaking about his conception of ecology at a garbage dump. He was also featured in the 2011 Marx Reloaded, directed by Jason Barker. Citation needed. Foreign Policy named ZIZEK one of its 2012 top 100 global thinkers for giving voice to an era of absurdity. 8. In 2019, ZIZEK began hosting a mini-series called How to Watch the News with Slavoj ZIZEK on the RT network. 45. In April, ZIZEK debated psychology professor Jordan Peterson at the Sony Center in Toronto, Canada over happiness under capitalism versus Marxism. 46-47. Personal life. ZIZEK has been married 4 times. His third wife was Argentine model Anelia Howney, whom he married in 2005. 48-49. He is currently married to the Slovene journalist and philosopher Jela Kresik, daughter of the architectural historian Peter Kresik. 50-51. He has 2 sons. 52. Aside from his native Slovene, ZIZEK is a fluent speaker of Serbo-Croatian, French, German and English. 53. Taste. In the 2012 Sight and Sound Critics poll, ZIZEK listed his 10 favorite films: 310 to Yuma, Dune, The Fountainhead, Hero, Hitman, Nightmare Alley, On Dangerous Ground, Opfergang, The Sound of Music, and We the Living. 54. In his tour of the Criterion Collection closet, he chose Trouble in Paradise, Sweet Smell of Success, Picnic at Hanging Rock, Murmur of the Heart, The Joke, The Ice Storm, Great Expectations, Roberto Rossellini's history films, City Lights, a box set of Carl Theodor Dreyer's films, Y2 Mama Tambien and Antichrist. 55. In an article called My Favorite Classics, ZIZEK states that Arnold Schoenberg's Gurlieder is the piece of music he would take to a desert island. He goes on to list other favorites, including Beethoven's Fidelio, Schubert's Winterreise, Mussorgsky's Kovenchkina, and Donizetti's El Elysir d'Amor. He expresses a particular love for Wagner, particularly Das Rheingold and Parsifal. He ranks Schoenberg over Stravinsky, and insists on Eisler's importance among Schoenberg's followers. 56. ZIZEK often lists Franz Kafka, Samuel Beckett, and Andrei Platonov as his 3 absolute masters of 20th-century literature. 57. He ranks/prefers Varlam Shalamov over Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Marina Tsveteva, and Osip Mandelstam over Anna Akhmatova. 58. Daphne du Maurier over Virginia Woolf, and Samuel Beckett over James Joyce. 57. Thought. In his early career, ZIZEK claimed a theoretical space molded by 3 centers of gravity: Hegelian dialectics, Lacanian psychoanalytic theory, and contemporary criticism of ideology, designating the theory of Jacques Lacan as the fundamental element. 59. In 2010, ZIZEK instead claimed that for him Hegel is more fundamental than Lacan. Even Lacan is just a tool for me to read Hegel. For me, always it is Hegel, Hegel, Hegel. 60. While in 2019, he claimed that for me, in some sense, all of philosophy happened in the 50 years between Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, 1781, and the death of George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, 1831. 61. Failure and subjectivity. Drawing on Hegel and Lacan, ZIZEK holds that every time one tries to actualize a position, it is shown to be self-contradictory and hence fails by its initial standards. Far from being a story of the progressive overcoming of antagonism, dialectics is for Hegel a systematic notation of the failure of all such attempts. 62. In order to achieve truth and liberation, absolute knowledge, in Hegel's terms, ZIZEK argues that one should stop trying to transcend deadlocks, since they are inevitable. Instead, one should embrace them and the positive opportunities they provide. 63. This corresponds to an embrace of subjectivity because, for ZIZEK, subjectivity itself is defined by deadlocks, in psychoanalytic terms, between conscious and unconscious, that lead to failure. Political theory. Ideology. ZIZEK's Lacanian informed theory of ideology is one of his major contributions to political theory. His first book in English, The Sublime Object of Ideology, and the documentary The Pervert's Guide to Ideology, in which he stars, are among the well-known places in which it is discussed. For ZIZEK, as for Marx, ideology is made up of fictions that structure political life. In Lacan's terms, ideology belongs to the symbolic order. ZIZEK argues that these fictions are primarily maintained at an unconscious level, rather than a conscious one. Since, according to psychoanalytic theory, the unconscious can determine one's actions directly, bypassing one's conscious awareness, as in parapraxis, ideology can be expressed in one's behavior, regardless of one's conscious beliefs. Hence, ZIZEK breaks with orthodox Marxist accounts that view ideology purely as a system of mistaken beliefs, see false consciousness. Drawing on Peter Sloterdijk's critique of cynical reason, ZIZEK argues that adopting a cynical perspective is not enough to escape ideology, since, according to ZIZEK, even though postmodern subjects are consciously cynical about the political situation, they continue to reinforce it through their behavior. 64. Freedom. ZIZEK claims that a sense of political freedom is sustained by a deeper unfreedom, at least under liberal capitalism. In a 2002 article, ZIZEK endorses Lenin's distinction between formal and actual freedom, claiming that liberal society only contains formal freedom, freedom of choice within the coordinates of the existing power relations, while prohibiting actual freedom, the site of an intervention that undermines these very coordinates. 65. In an oft-quoted passage from a book published in the same year, he writes that, in these conditions of liberal censorship, we feel free because we lack the very language to articulate our unfreedom. 66. In a 2019 article, he writes that Marx made a valuable point with his claim that the market economy combines in a unique way political and personal freedom with social unfreedom. Personal freedom, freely selling myself on the market, is the very form of my unfreedom. 67. However, in 2014, he rejects the pseudo-Marxist total derision of formal freedom, claiming that it is necessary for critique. When we are formally free, only then we become aware how limited this freedom actually is. 57. Communism. Although sometimes adopting the title of radical leftist, 68, ZIZEK also controversially insists on identifying as a communist, even though he rejects 20th century communism as a total failure, and decries the communism of the 20th century, more specifically all the network of phenomena we refer to as Stalinism, as maybe the worst ideological, political, ethical, social, and so on, catastrophe in the history of humanity. 69. ZIZEK justifies this choice by claiming that only the term communism signals a genuine step outside of the existing order, in part since the term socialism no longer has radical enough implications, and means nothing more than that one cares for society. 70. In Marx Reloaded, ZIZEK rejects both 20th century totalitarianism and spontaneous local self-organization, direct democracy, councils, and so on. There, he endorses a definition of communism as a society where everyone would be allowed to dwell in his or her stupidity, an idea with which he credits Frederick Jameson as the inspiration. 71. ZIZEK has labeled himself a communist in a qualified sense. 72. When he spoke at a conference on the idea of communism, he applied, in qualified form, the communist label to the Occupy Wall Street protesters. They are not communists, if communism means the system which deservedly collapsed in 1990, and remember that the communists who are still in power today run the most ruthless capitalism, in China. The only sense in which the protesters are communists is that they care for the commons of nature, of knowledge, which are threatened by the system. They are dismissed as dreamers, but the true dreamers are those who think that things can go on indefinitely the way they are now, with just a few cosmetic changes. They are not dreamers, they are awakening from a dream which is turning into a nightmare. They are not destroying anything, they are reacting to how the system is gradually destroying itself. 73. Theology. ZIZEK is a committed atheist, a stance he defended at length in his article Atheism is a Legacy Worth Fighting For in the New York Times. 74. However, he nonetheless finds extensive conceptual value in Christianity, particularly Protestantism. The subtitle of his 2000 book The Fragile Absolute is or, Why is the Christian Legacy Worth Fighting For? Hence, he labels his position Christian atheism. 75. And has written about theology at length. 76. In The Pervert's Guide to Ideology, ZIZEK suggests that the only way to be an atheist is through Christianity, since, he claims, atheism often fails to escape the religious paradigm by remaining faithful to an external guarantor of meaning, simply switching God for natural necessity or evolution. Christianity, on the other hand, in the doctrine of the Incarnation, brings God down from the beyond and onto earth, into human affairs, For ZIZEK, this paradigm is more authentically godless, since the external guarantee is abolished. 77. Criticism and controversy. Inconsistency and ambiguity. ZIZEK's philosophical and political positions are not always clearly understandable, and his work has been criticized for a failure to take a consistent stance. 78. While he has claimed to stand by a revolutionary Marxist project, his lack of vision concerning the possible circumstances which could lead to successful revolution makes it unclear what that project consists of. According to John Gray and John Holbo, his theoretical argument often lacks grounding in historical fact, which makes him more provocative than insightful. 79. 80-81. In a very negative review of ZIZEK's book Less Than Nothing, the British political philosopher John Gray attacked ZIZEK for his celebrations of violence, his failure to ground his theories in historical facts, and his formless radicalism which, according to Gray, professes to be communist yet lacks the conviction that communism could ever be successfully realized. Gray concluded that ZIZEK's work, though entertaining, is intellectually worthless, achieving a deceptive substance by endlessly reiterating an essentially empty vision. ZIZEK's work amounts in the end to less than nothing. 79. ZIZEK's refusal to present an alternative vision has led critics to accuse him of using unsustainable Marxist categories of analysis and having a 19th-century understanding of class. 82. For example, Ecobedo Lacotte argued that ZIZEK uses class as a sort of deus ex machina to play the role of the good guy against the multicultural devils. 83. In his book Living in the End Times, ZIZEK suggests that the criticism of his positions is itself ambiguous and multilateral. I am attacked for being anti-Semitic and for spreading Zionist lies, for being a covert Slovene nationalist and unpatriotic traitor to my nation, for being a crypto-Stalinist defending terror and for spreading bourgeois lies about communism, so maybe, just maybe I am on the right path, the path of fidelity to freedom. 84 page. Needed. Stylistic confusion. ZIZEK has been criticized for his chaotic and non-systematic style. Harpum calls ZIZEK's style a stream of non-consecutive units arranged in arbitrary sequences that solicit a sporadic and discontinuous attention. 85 O'Neill concurs, a dizzying array of wildly entertaining and often quite maddening rhetorical strategies are deployed in order to beguile, browbeat, dumbfound, dazzle, confuse, mislead, overwhelm, and generally subdue the reader into acceptance. 86. Noam Chomsky deems ZIZEK guilty of using fancy terms like polysyllables and pretending you have a theory when you have no theory whatsoever, adding that his views are often too obscure to be communicated usefully to common people. 87. Conservative thinker Roger Scruton claims that, to summarize ZIZEK's position is not easy, he slips between philosophical and psychoanalytical ways of arguing, and is spellbound by Lacan's gnomic utterances. He is a lover of paradox, and believes strongly in what Hegel called the labor of the negative, though taking the idea, as always, one stage further towards the brick wall of paradox. 88. Careless scholarship. ZIZEK has been accused of approaching phenomena without rigor, reductively forcing them to support pre-given theoretical notions. For example, Tanya Modelsky alleges that in trying to make Hitchcock fit Lacan, ZIZEK frequently ends up simplifying what goes on in the films. 89. Similarly, Yanis Stavrakakis criticizes ZIZEK's reading of Antigone, claiming it proceeds without regard for both the play itself and the interpretation, given by Lacan in his seventh seminar, which ZIZEK claims to follow. According to Stavrakakis, ZIZEK mistakenly characterizes Antigone's act, illegally burying her brother, as politically radical/revolutionary, when in reality her act is a one-off and she couldn't care less about what will happen in the polis after her suicide. 90. Noah Horwitz alleges that ZIZEK, and the Ljubljana school to which ZIZEK belongs, mistakenly conflate the insights of Lacan and Hegel, and registers concern that such a move risks transforming Lacanian psychoanalysis into a discourse of self-consciousness rather than a discourse on the psychoanalytic, Freudian unconscious. 91. He goes on to argue that Lacan and Hegel differ in that Lacan aims to access the particular unconscious of a given subject, Hegel outlines the impossibility of a direct particular encounter, due to the presence of unconscious universals. Plagiarism. ZIZEK's tendency to recycle portions of his own texts in subsequent works resulted in the accusation of self-plagiarism by the New York Times in 2014, after ZIZEK published an op-ed in the magazine which contained portions of his writing from an earlier book. 92. In response, ZIZEK expressed perplexity at the harsh tone of the denunciation, emphasizing that the recycled passages in question only acted as references from his theoretical books to supplement otherwise original writing. 92. In July 2014, Newsweek reported that online bloggers led by Steve Saylor had discovered that in an article published in 2006, ZIZEK plagiarized long passages from an earlier review by Stanley Hornbeck that first appeared in the journal American Renaissance, a publication condemned by the Southern Poverty Law Center as the organ of a white nationalist hate group. 93. In response to the allegations, ZIZEK stated, "The friend sent it to me, assuring me that I can use it freely since it merely resumes another's line of thought. Consequently, I did just that, and I sincerely apologize for not knowing that my friend's resume was largely borrowed from Stanley Hornbeck's review of MacDonald's book. In no way can I thus be accused of plagiarizing another's line of thought, of stealing ideas. I nonetheless deeply regret the incident. 94. Defense of Eurocentrism. ZIZEK has expressed opinions in which he defends Eurocentrism. 95 and recognizes positive aspects of the colonial rule. 96 These views have been criticized by Indian feminist Nivedita Menon. 97 By the Iranian intellectual Hamid Dabishi. 98 By the decolonial Argentine thinker Walter Mignolo. 99 And even by someone closer to ZIZEK, the Mexican Marxist David Pavon Cuellar. 100 Among others. Transgender issues. ZIZEK has published several articles concerning transgender issues that have proved controversial, and led to accusations of transphobia. In 2016, he published an article called "The Sexual is Political" in the Philosophical Salon 101, within which transgender issues are a central topic. ZIZEK argues that, from the breakdown of biology identity links implicit in transgenderism, the logical conclusion is a post-genderist vision of complete sexual fluidity. However, he claims, transgender subjects do not, in reality, show such heroic indifference to gender roles. Instead, they seek a stable site, for instance, in relation to bathroom access. Drawing on Jacques Lacan's theory of sexual difference, he argues that such a stable identification is impossible, because there is a fundamental antagonism in every sexual identity. This holds for cisgender subjects, inaccurately termed normal heterosexuals, as well as transgender subjects. Hence, he endorses a general gender bathroom which accommodates this necessary incompletion of every sexual interpellation. Che Gossett criticized ZIZEK for his use of the pathologizing term transgenderism, for writing about trans subjectivity with such assumed authority while ignoring the voices of trans theorists, academics and activists, entirely, as well as for purportedly claiming that a futuristic, post-genderist vision underlies so-called transgenderism, against which Gossett argues that trans and gender non-conforming people are situated, like the violence of the gender binary which we oppose, within the theoretical and political coordinates of history and history's present tense, the afterlife of slavery and colonialism. 102. Lacanian Sam Warren Meal criticized the article for rehearsing homophobic/transphobic cliches, noting ZIZEK's quip about interspecies marriage as a possible anti-discriminatory demand, for instance, for mistakenly equating transgenderism and postgenderism, and for misusing Lacanian theory. 103. ZIZEK defended his article in two follow-up pieces. The first addresses purported misreadings of his position 104, while the second is a more sustained defense, against Meal, of the article's application of Lacanian theory 105, to which Meal responded in turn. 106 Douglas Lane also defended ZIZEK, claiming that, if one takes his comments in context, it becomes clear that he is not opposed to the struggle of LGBTQ people but is instead critiquing a phony liberal ideology that set up the terms of the LGBTQ struggle, a certain utopian postmodern ideology that seeks to eliminate all limits, to eliminate all binaries, to go beyond norms because the imposition of a limit is patriarchal and oppressive. 107. In 2019, ZIZEK published an article in The Spectator entitled "Transgender Dogma is Naive and Incompatible with Freud", 108, which also discusses transgender issues. There, he argued that there is a tension in LGBT+ ideology between social constructivism and some kind of biological determinism, between, on the one hand, the idea that gender is a social construct, and, on the other, the idea that transgender people's gender is an essential quality that precedes socialization. He concludes the essay with a Freudian solution to this deadlock. Psychic sexual identity is a choice, not a biological fact, but it is not a conscious choice that the subject can playfully repeat and transform. It is an unconscious choice which precedes subjective constitution and which is, as such, formative of subjectivity, which means that the change of this choice entails the radical transformation of the bearer of the choice. In response to the title, Mackenzie Wark had t-shirts made with the transgender flag and "Incompatible with Freud" printed on them. 109. Both of these articles were criticized by Chris Kaufman in her book Queer Traversals. Kaufman criticizes ZIZEK for engaging with the issue superficially, ignoring recent Lacanian scholarship and the voices of trans theorists, academics, and activists, and conflating transgenderism and so-called postgenderism. According to Kaufman, the position with which ZIZEK concludes the 2019 article is entirely consonant with transgender discourse, and hence ZIZEK's opposal of psychoanalytic and transgender discourses is inaccurate. 110. Works. Bibliography. Main article, Slavoj Zizek Bibliography. Filmography. Year title. 1993 Labuk, a film from Slovenia. 1996 Liebe dein Symptom wie dich selbst. Predictions of Fire. 1997 Post-Socialism plus Retro Avant-Garde plus Irwin. 2004 The Reality of the Virtual. 2005 ZIZEK. 2006 The Pervert's Guide to Cinema. The Possibility of Hope. 2008 Examined Life. 2009 Terror. Robespierre and the French Revolution. Alien, Marx and Co. Slavoj ZIZEK, Ein Portrait. 2011 Marx Reloaded. 2012 Katastroika. The Pervert's Guide to Ideology. 2013 Balkan Spirit. 2016 Risk. Houston, We Have a Problem. 2018 Turn On, Short, 111. 2021 Bliss.